Scared Stiff Part 3. Thomas came down and spoke to his son but refused to bail him out. Seeing his boy, scruffy-faced and looking defeated, nearly broke his heart. However, Thomas was firm in his resolve to not bail out his only son. The family recently had a baby daughter and Thomas was not going to allow anyone dealing with drugs to live in a home that he fought so hard to get. Robert was truly on his own in jail and he had no one to blame but himself. His first offense was relatively minor, so when he got out after about a month, there was enough time to have let the guilt build and the resentment fester. When he got out of jail, he was hardened and bitter, sure that his father had deserted him. He was determined to exact revenge for being left behind. Once he was released, he was careful to watch his family's patterns of leaving and returning home. Finally, Robert waited until his family was leaving and promptly broke into his own home one evening. It took him a while, but finally, after rifling through drawers and closets, Robert found what he was looking for. A gun that his father had kept hidden for fear that his little sister would stumble upon it. Robert also took his mother's jewelry, tore apart the rooms, and made the break-in look like it was a real robbery. He hoped the police would never know what happened. At 18 years old, Robert was now a convicted felon and in possession of a weapon, two things which could only lead to trouble for the young man. Robert's father knew how desperate his son was and instinctively knew it was Robert who had staged the robbery. He refused to file charges against his son, who seemed to be turning into a career criminal. He was starting to think that his boy was too far gone to be helped. Thomas didn't even know where his son was living or with whom. He changed the locks on the home and set up an alarm system, fearing for his family's safety. After the staged robbery at his father's house, Robert knew the corner drugstore would be a perfect target. He was determined to steal drugs and make money, for he was very desperate at the time. Living with a fellow dealer, Robert was now hurting for cash. Outside of dealing, he didn't really know anything else that would net him some fast cash. Robert planned exactly when to hit the drugstore. He followed the patterns of movement that the employees would engage in daily, and realized exactly when the drugstore would be closed, locked, and empty. He threw a brick through the basement window and shimmied his way inside. Eventually, he encountered a locked door, and reached for a crowbar that he saw propped up in a far corner of the basement. With surprising efficiency, he pried open the door and found himself in a wonderland of cash possibilities. The drug market had changed wildly since he did his first deal a year and a half ago. Now, people were looking for the prescription drugs that could guarantee a fast, prolonged high. When Robert broke through the door, a loud alarm screamed into the night and Robert scrambled through the drugstore, trying desperately to get what he needed and get out. When Robert looked outside, all he could see were men in blue, and his heart sank when he realized he wouldn't be getting away this time. He desperately didn't want to shoot the gun he'd stolen. Shooting, even in a panic as he now was, would be a sure way for him to get killed, and he didn't want that. There was no way out, not without a dangerous shootout, so he went back out the way he came in and surrendered peacefully. If he wasn't in serious trouble before, he certainly was now, and he knew for certain this had to have been his absolute worst nightmare come to life. He was cuffed, thrown in prison and ignored by his family. Jimmy was raised by Robert's brother and sister-in-law, who took him as frequently as possible for visits with his father, Robert, in prison. As he grew older, Jimmy saw very quickly how difficult life in prison was, and even though Robert's brother and sister-in-law saw the purpose for these visits, after all, they viewed it as a way for their nephew to get to know his father. Jimmy began to understand exactly how sad and difficult a life in prison was. As Jimmy got older, his dad started telling him about how watchful prison had made him, and how he always had to watch his back among the other cellmates, many of whom were in for more deadly crimes. He also had deals with several of the other prisoners, where he would do favors for these prisoners and they would offer him protection. In addition to having limited freedom, as Robert did have some duties in the prison library, Robert also told Jimmy about how many prisoners would scheme to get transferred to a medical facility. There were several instances of self-harm inside the prison walls, and all were cases where Robert suspected they wanted to simply escape the dangerous criminals, the people who wouldn't think twice about causing serious injury to someone who got in their way or for no reason at all. It was not unusual to find your head covered by a large towel and other prisoners lighting a match to the top of the towel on your head. You may be sound asleep at 3 a.m., only to jolted awake by having cold water thrown on your face. Jimmy was appalled by what he was told. He knew his dad had no reason to lie to him. At first, he wasn't sure why his father would tell him these stories, but he saw the haunted look in his father's eyes and recognized it as his father's way of trying to keep Jimmy safe. Robert's brother and sister-in-law weren't thrilled that Jimmy would come home and tell them about the latest round of stories that Robert had told him, but they knew that Robert was really trying to educate Jimmy in the way no one else could.